But without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first performance for this afternoon, which is by the Stealth Aspies.
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 Aspies, thank you.
And I was going to get that right, yeah. Stealth Aspies. So this show was premiered at Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2017. And this is very much about wanting to capture and reflect the experience of autistic people, either late diagnosed or having to hide their true natures from all around them. What we hope is this performance will be really enjoyable, but also uplifting, inspiring, and also perhaps you'll go away knowing a bit more. So I'd like to hand the stage over to the Stealth
Aspies.
Aspies. Yes.
It's short for Aspies. Thank you.
Well, this is surreal, ladies and gentlemen. I'd say it's an outdated patriarchal term. My name is Paul Wady. I was diagnosed with high-functioning autism at the age of 41. Not having a history of depression or instability, it was rather difficult to get me. What happened to me is stated in The Guardian, if you want to look me up. It was interviewed in 2005. Anyway, 2015, I'm happily married to a woman who is also diagnosed in the autistic spectrum at the age of 40. And I was working for the National Autistic Society, and I wanted to find a way of expressing what it was to be autistic in a fun, positive, empowering way, and have this huge skill set as a performer. So I started my own one-man show, Gorilla Aspies, named after the book I published, which was selling out there. The book teaches you how to seduce, manipulate, coerce, and generally bully, in other words, be a normal person. So, yeah, it's a means by which you can say a great deal at once through satire, and with the solo show I convert whole audiences. I then brought together, as my privilege to bring together, a theatre company of other autistic people, all these unique individuals in their own right, who you're going to hear speaking today. I put out a survey online, which you can find on the Stealth Aspies Twitter, which asks autistic people to talk about when you're still in the neurodiverse closet and you're a late diagnosis, and that's what we're going to hear today, unedited raw accounts. And the running order, the material, is what we used in Edinburgh. We didn't select anything specifically for this audience, but you'd be very surprised what you've got in common with the people you hear. Thank you.
My name is Alain English, English with a Scottish accent. This is a definition of the term neurotypical. Now, neurotypical, not displaying or characterised by neurologically atypical patterns of thought or behaviour. So, in other words, Donald Trump is a neurotypical, if you can believe that.
I found out I was autistic about 5 months ago at the age of 44. So, this is Rebecca. I found out 5 months ago at the age of 44, and this was possibly one of the most traumatic but liberating things I found out about myself. And it made sense. So now I'm in the so now what stage of learning about this thing that defines me, but it also doesn't. Knowing what I am is so confusing, but it's also freeing in how I can see more information now to help me deal with the anxiety. The anxiety and the insomnia are the worst. The creativity is really cool, but the mind ramblings, the fix need to be right, and the need to have days out a lot is a real pain. As is working in the normal world with people that seem so rude But apparently they are normal and I am rude. I hide it at work, but it's really frustrating. And also, I see so many more people now as autistic. Now that I have more knowledge about it, they really are everywhere. So, I pretend I'm not autistic by just being quiet and not interacting much. I hide behind using a computer to communicate, and I rewrite most of my emails with social niceties and less brutal truisms. I have been pretending I was not autistic for 44 years.
This was a person who identified himself by the name Nick. I have been struggling with severe anxiety, especially social, and depression for quite some time, never feeling like I could connect with other people. They were so weird and incomprehensible to me. One day, when I was maybe around 40, there was a quiz going around Facebook, which I took, and my score was well into the autism Asperger's range. The first reaction was that it was just nonsense and some silly internet quiz, but I was compelled to do some research. When I did, I realised that I identified quite a lot with what I was reading. Sometime in the next couple of years, I went to an autism clinic that specialised in adult diagnoses and was given a professional diagnosis. It's just who I am. It's not a lack of skill or intelligence. It's not a surplus either. I just have a different skill set than average. For example, asking me to babysit is like asking an average, non-technical person to please code a mobile app. The latter I could easily do, even though I never have. But babysitting is completely non-intuitive to me. But before I knew I was autistic, I used to feel like I was a failure as a human being, because things that seemed to come naturally to most people were near impossible to me. The things that I struggled to even endure, others didn't even seem to notice. It wasn't until I understood that I was autistic that I realised that other people didn't experience the world the same way that I did. Other people are able to filter sensory input so that they are not bombarded with everything at the same intensity. Other people can process speech real time without a delay so they can keep up with conversations. Other people can fill in information about moods and feelings without even having to think about it, rather than only seeing or hearing what is actually, literally there. I don't necessarily hide it, but I don't really advertise it either. If it becomes an issue, then I will mention it. I spent 40 years of my life trying to be something unnatural to me. It's very draining, and I suffered periods of burnout, where I wasn't able to do much of anything. I have better things to spend my energy on now. I'm not really able to put on an act. All I can do is suppress. My method of pretending is really just being silent and still, which ends up drawing attention anyway. My silence and lack of expression have always stood out as weird to other people. And it's always what people comment on, so it's not a very effective act. I have learned stock responses and small talk. I hate them. But I can use them appropriately when I have to, in order to not seem too weird. I cannot, however, do anything beyond that. I can't spontaneously do conversation at all. I don't talk. I mean, this is not literally true, as I'm capable of speech, but I can't participate in spontaneous conversations. I can give short answers to questions, but my speech processing time is so long. It's just easier for me to not talk. I tend to put everyone else's comfort above my own, so I feel like I compromise quite a lot. It's very hard for me to ask for accommodations. I'm embarrassed that it's so difficult for me to handle things that don't bother other people, so I just shut off instead of saying anything. I've always tried to be as invisible as possible. I felt like I was broken and weak. I thought that everyone experienced the world like I did, and they were just somehow stronger and better able to cope than I was. It didn't help that my former stepdad treated me as if this were true. At this point in my life, I am done pretending to be something I'm not. I will choose to be poor rather than expending significant energy faking it just to have a little more money, and then not be able to enjoy life anyway. It was very difficult pretending I was not autistic. I was ashamed that I was perceived as weird no matter how hard I tried to be normal. I pushed myself to do things that were insanely difficult for me because other people did them with little effort, and I didn't want to be seen as weak or lazy. I did nothing but work and sleep because I had no energy for anything else. And then my life felt pointless. I would never suggest that someone try to do neurotypical. Typical does not equal better. Best, it equals average. However, I do find that if I practice proper self-care, including eating properly, sleeping enough, and allowing myself plenty of alone time pursuing my own interests for recuperation, it is much easier to participate in the world at large in smaller doses, without being so overwhelmed that it causes a disturbance.
This is someone called, who called themselves Mabs Beat. I was 16 and attending college when I was sent to the educational psychologist for evaluation. I found out then, I'm fine with being autistic, although sometimes it can be a bit isolating. I wish there was more understanding and knowledge from people. I can act sometimes as if I'm not autistic by communicating and socialising more with other people rather than sticking to my own routine and avoiding contact. But often I don't make eye contact and I still a lot. This happens every time I communicate with people. People never call me out on it or criticise me for it. I compromise by leaving my comfort zone to spend time with neurotypicals and sometimes do activities I wouldn't normally do, i.e. sports, holidays.
Okay, so this is a PhD female medical student. I was 24 and a computer science PhD student when I discovered I was on the spectrum. I started having panic attacks the summer before my 24th birthday, and over the following couple of months, I descended into severe depression. I eventually went to my GP, who, after months of getting nowhere, persuaded me to see a counsellor, who noted that I wouldn't look her in the eye and said, "What do you know about Asperger's syndrome?" She followed this up with, "But I don't know. I mean, you obviously have a sense of humour and you're not meant to if you're on the spectrum." I was offended because all I'd been told about ASD was that autistic people don't realise that other people have feelings. This, and the humour thing, made me sure that I could not be autistic. Au contraire, I went home and I did some Google searching and discovered that actually those things are myths. And it was obvious that I have Asperger's right from the start. I mentioned this to my GP at my next appointment, and she immediately referred me for a diagnosis. I was officially diagnosed about 9 months later at the age of 25. I want the world to know that autistic people, A, have feelings, B, can empathise, C, care about other people. I also wish that autism were not understood as primarily a social and/or communication disorder with sensory processing weirdnesses as a side note, but rather a sensory processing difference that has social communication side effects. I have to hide it, and I have done since I was diagnosed almost 2 years ago. I'm a medical student, and due to the autistic people can't feel empathy and autistic people don't like people myths, it would hurt my career if people made these assumptions about me. My immediate family and one of my best friends knows. The other one said, "Oh, but you're not medically weird, you're just normally weird," when I tried to tell her, so I didn't mention it again, and I don't know whether she really registered it. I pretend I'm neurotypical with difficulty. It takes a lot of energy. For years, it also used energy turned against myself as I tried to experience the world the way I was told I should, tried to find the sensory and emotional and physiological responses in myself that I was told I was having when they're not there, and deny the ones that are. Now at least I can understand and focus all my energy on passing in public. I don't have to pretend when I'm at home on my own. I try to act normal in public and suppress more obvious stims, although sometimes they get through if I'm not paying attention. I make excuses like, I have an appointment, to explain why I can't do things, instead of being able to say, I'm completely overwhelmed by processing sensory input and I need to go home and shut myself away until I've recovered. I tell people I have a migraine, instead of saying, I'm having an autistic shutdown. I pretend that things don't hurt my senses when they do. I fake enthusiasm for things I don't care about or that scare the hell out of me because that's the normal response. I claim reactions to things that I don't experience. I nod along and pretend to understand when actually I have no idea what's going on.
This was a man called Malcolm. I found out shortly after my 41st birthday. I had to chase the diagnosis myself. The GP practice had never dealt with an adult diagnosis before and didn't know where to send me. I had to source that for them.